Click for IB Biology. Here we're looking at methods to determine the population size of sessile species, and sessile means where an organism does not move, so it's not moving. And so for most purposes this turns out to be groups of plants, although things like barnacles on rocky foreshores could be a possibility of this technique. There's a blank version of this presentation, a PDF, in the description. You can download that and annotate with your own notes. There are 10 questions with answers. And also in the channel link there's an AI prompt that you can cut and paste into a chatbot and use that to individualize your own learning. So let's look at this method to estimate the population size of a sessile organism, and it is an estimate method. To get the absolute population size, you would have to count every individual, and areas of study are usually so large that this is impractical. So we use a statistical method of sampling. And our equipment for this is what is called a quadrat, which often students are familiar with framed quadrats, which are squares like this. There are also structures known as point quadrats, and quadrats can be constructed of any size. Indeed, often when studying large sessile species such as these trees here, we actually make our quadrat from something like a piece of string. So we're going to estimate the population of trees. Here the trees are on an island, I've decided, and this symbol here represents the trees. So how do we find the population? Well, the key is that we need a random sampling technique. Now in this context, the word random means that every individual which is in the sample area has an equal chance of being sampled. Poor ecology technique sometimes sees students throwing objects such as a shoe or a ball over their shoulder in some attempt at randomness. This is in fact a biased sample, since when you throw an object in such a manner, it's actually going in one direction, not in another, and therefore there is not an equal chance of the individuals being counted. What we need instead is a systematic counting technique, and that begins with a grid system. So as you can see, I've already set up the grid system on my island here on the map, and then we would need to number the coordinates, such as going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, and in this direction as well, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's our coordinate. Our coordinates are down. Now what we need to do is we need to count the number of individuals within a sample quadrat. So let's imagine that our quadrats are the size of these grids here, and so we would then select one of these grid squares and count the number of individuals within that. So we would count the number of trees in this case, although for other plants it may be more suitable to do percentage cover. How many quadrats are we going to take? Well, that would require that the sample is large enough to give us a representation of the total area. So perhaps as much as 10% of the entire area needs to be sampled. In order to select the grids, the randomness of our grid chosen is achieved usually through using tables of random numbers, although today it's perfectly possible to generate tables of random numbers online. So those random numbers may give us two numbers. For instance, they may say 3 and 4, and so we would go along here to 3 and then up to 4, and then we would count the 3, 4 grid and record our number of trees. Having done so, what we then do is we add up all of our counts and then find the average per quadrat. Once we have the average per quadrat, then what we do is we multiply by the number of quadrats for the actual area to get our population estimate. So this description is fairly straightforward and fairly simple. In practice, such methods can be very time consuming, and the terrain, the location can make this quite a difficult process to actually carry out. It is possible to make our method more elaborate by using further statistical descriptors such as standard deviation, but I'll leave that to the videos on statistics for you to review that method. One way of improving the method I've just shown you is a very simple technique called the running average. So we're in this forest and we're using our Quadrat method. We're generating random numbers. We're generating numbers per quadrat. And so after 1 quadrat, 2, 3, 4, and 5, so after 2 or 3 quadrats, we can calculate the average. And so then plot this on the graph here. What one observes is that as the quadrat numbers increase early on in our study, the mean tends to vary considerably. However, after a suitable number of quadrats, the average tends to stabilize, where there's very little change in the average number of individuals per quadrat for the total sample. At that point, the mean has averaged and you can stop quadrating, and we have our running average to use in our estimate of the population. This is a very popular technique used in field studies. In the next video, we're going to look at a method for determining the population size of mobile species. There's the channel link that you can subscribe with, and there's the playlist to the rest of the population and community videos.